summarizing 10 major objections to Marxism and socialism. Marxism and socialism have been subjects of intense debate and scrutiny since their inception. While these ideologies have garnered a significant following and influenced socio-political movements across the globe, they also face substantial criticism. This video aims to explore 10 major objections that critics raise against Marxism and socialism, shedding light on the nuances of these ideologies and the concerns they evoke. Number 1. Economic inefficiency and lack of innovation. Critics of Marxism and socialism have long raised objections about the potential economic inefficiencies and lack of innovation inherent in these ideologies. The central tenets of centralized economic planning and the absence of private ownership are at the heart of these concerns. The key argument is that these features can result in suboptimal resource allocation and hinder the drive for innovation, thus impeding overall economic growth. One of the primary critiques centers around the elimination of market competition and the absence of private incentives. In capitalist economies, competition among businesses drives efficiency and encourages the constant pursuit of better products and services. In contrast, Marxist and socialist systems often involve state-controlled or collectively owned means of production, which critics argue may lack the same competitive pressure. The absence of this driving force could lead to complacency and reduced efforts to improve productivity. Furthermore, the concept of private ownership and individual incentives is seen as a powerful catalyst for innovation. Entrepreneurs and innovators are motivated by the potential for personal gain, whether in the form of profit or ownership of their creations. By abolishing private ownership and emphasizing collective ownership, Marxism and socialism may inadvertently dampen the motivation to innovate. Critics contend that the allure of personal success and rewards is a significant factor in pushing individuals to create, invent, and contribute to technological advancements. The proponents of capitalism also argue that market-driven economies have an inherent adaptability to changing demands. Market competition encourages businesses to respond swiftly to shifts in consumer preferences and technological advancements. This adaptability is seen as crucial for a dynamic and thriving economy. In contrast, the centralized planning characteristic of socialist economies can struggle to promptly reallocate resources based on changing needs. Critics fear that this rigidity might lead to overproduction or shortages of goods and services, thus hindering economic progress. A notable historical example often cited by critics is the experience of the Soviet Union. The state-controlled economy resulted in long queues for basic necessities and limited access to innovation. The absence of market mechanisms to gauge demand and allocate resources effectively contributed to economic stagnation and inefficiencies. In response to these criticisms, proponents of socialism argue that while market competition and private incentives might be powerful drivers of efficiency and innovation, they can also foster income inequality and lead to exploitation. They contend that a balance can be struck by introducing elements of socialism while preserving incentives for innovation and individual efforts. In conclusion, the objections against Marxism and socialism, particularly concerning economic inefficiency and lack of innovation, stem from the fundamental changes these ideologies propose in resource allocation and ownership structures. Critics highlight the role of market competition and private incentives in driving economic growth and innovation, while proponents of these ideologies argue for a more equitable distribution of resources and the elimination of exploitation. Addressing these concerns while maintaining the impetus for efficiency and innovation remains a challenge. The debate underscores the need for a nuanced understanding of the complexities and trade-offs associated with different economic systems. Number 2. Infringement on individual freedom. A central objection to Marxist and socialist ideologies is the perceived threat they pose to individual freedom and autonomy. Critics contend that the concentration of power required for implementing collectivist policies can lead to curtailment of personal choices, ultimately restricting citizens' ability to pursue their own goals. At the heart of this concern is the role of the state in these systems. Marxist and socialist frameworks often advocate for a significant degree of state control over various aspects of society, including the economy, resources, and even individual behavior. While proponents argue that this level of control is essential for achieving a more equitable distribution of wealth and resources, critics argue that it can inadvertently lead to a loss of individual agency. One key point of contention is the potential erosion of economic freedom. Critics posit that when the state assumes control over the means of production and distribution, it limits individuals' ability to engage in economic activities of their choosing. The absence of a competitive market can stifle entrepreneurship and innovation, as well as limit the options available for individuals seeking to pursue their economic ambitions. Moreover, critics express concerns over the influence of the state on personal decisions and lifestyles. In order to establish a collectivist society, these systems may necessitate conformity to a prescribed set of norms and values. Critics argue that this can infringe on personal freedoms, such as the right to express oneself, practice one's religion, or make choices about one's personal life without interference from the state. The concentration of power in the hands of the state also raises concerns about potential abuses. Critics contend that without adequate checks and balances, a powerful centralized government could easily suppress dissent and limit civil liberties. History provides examples of oppressive regimes that emerged under the banner of socialist or communist ideologies, reinforcing these concerns. Proponents of Marxism and socialism often respond by emphasizing the intended goals of these ideologies, to eliminate exploitation and ensure a more just distribution of resources. They argue that while some individual freedoms may be curtailed, the collective benefits gained through shared ownership and resource allocation can create a more equitable and just society. However, critics maintain that the potential trade-offs between economic equality and personal freedom must be carefully considered. Striking the right balance between state control and individual autonomy is a complex challenge, and historical instances of human rights abuses under authoritarian socialist regimes underscore the need for caution. In conclusion, the objection of infringement on individual freedom in Marxist and socialist systems reflects a deep concern about the concentration of power and the potential impact on personal autonomy. The tension between collective well-being and individual rights remains a pivotal aspect of the ongoing debate surrounding these ideologies. Addressing these concerns requires careful consideration of the mechanisms through which state control is implemented and the potential consequences for personal liberties. Number 3. Human nature and incentives. One of the enduring objections raised against Marxism and socialism revolves around the perceived misalignment between these ideologies and certain aspects of human nature. Critics argue that these systems often overlook fundamental human traits such as the need for incentives and the desire for personal gain. The abolition of private property and the equal distribution of resources, critics contend, could potentially undermine incentives for hard work, innovation, and entrepreneurship, ultimately stifling progress. A central pillar of capitalism is the role of incentives in driving individual behavior. The pursuit of profit, personal gain, and success are often hailed as powerful motivators that lead to economic growth and innovation. Critics of Marxism and socialism assert that the elimination of private ownership, which underpins these incentives, might diminish the drive to excel and contribute to societal advancement. The equal distribution of resources, a hallmark of many socialist systems, has faced criticism for potentially creating a level of economic sameness that suppresses individual ambition. Critics argue that when individuals are assured of receiving the same benefits regardless of their efforts, the motivation to strive for excellence diminishes. The prospect of personal gain, whether through monetary rewards or ownership of one's accomplishments, is seen as a critical factor in pushing individuals to go beyond the norm and innovate. Furthermore, the critics assert that the abolition of private property could lead to the tragedy of the commons, a scenario where communal ownership encourages individuals to exploit resources without regard for the long-term consequences. Private ownership is often viewed as a means of ensuring responsible stewardship and sustainable use of resources. In its absence, there may be little incentive for individuals to conserve or invest in resources for the benefit of future generations. Innovation and entrepreneurship, which are vital for economic progress, could also be impacted. The risk-taking and resource allocation decisions associated with these endeavors often rely on the potential for substantial personal gains. Critics argue that in a socialist system where rewards are equalized, individuals may be less inclined to take such risks, leading to a lack of creativity and the potential stifling of technological advancements. Proponents of socialism counter these arguments by highlighting the potential benefits of removing the profit motive. They contend that when individuals are free from the pursuit of personal gain, they can prioritize the collective well-being and contribute to society in ways beyond financial accumulation. Additionally, they argue that by ensuring basic needs are met for all members of society, socialist systems can create an environment that fosters cooperation and collaboration. In conclusion, the objections surrounding human nature and incentives in Marxist and socialist systems stem from concerns about the potential consequences of eliminating private ownership and personal gain. Critics argue that without the impetus of individual incentives, there might be a disincentive for hard work, innovation, and entrepreneurship, which are critical drivers of progress. Balancing the principles of collective well-being with the recognition of individual motivations remains a complex challenge at the heart of the ongoing debate surrounding these ideologies. Number 4. Failure of historical implementations. Critics of Marxism and socialism often highlight historical instances of implementation that have resulted in authoritarianism, human rights abuses, and economic hardships. The experiences of countries like the Soviet Union, Maoist China, and North Korea are frequently cited as cautionary examples that underscore the potential pitfalls of these ideologies when translated into practice. The Soviet Union serves as a prominent case study of how well-intentioned Marxist principles can transform into an authoritarian regime. While the initial goals were to establish a classless society and ensure equitable distribution of resources, the centralized control of the state led to a concentration of power in the hands of a few. This concentration of power not only stifled political dissent, but also resulted in widespread human rights abuses. Critics argue that the very principles aimed at promoting equality often led to a repressive regime that curtailed individual freedoms. Similarly, Maoist China, under the banner of socialism, underwent drastic transformations that had far-reaching negative consequences. The Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, driven by collectivist ideologies, caused immense suffering, economic instability, and social upheaval. Critics contend that the prioritization of ideological purity over practical considerations resulted in widespread famine, economic stagnation, and the suppression of dissenting voices. North Korea, another example often invoked, portrays how an unchecked, centralized government can lead to a cult of personality and isolationism. The regime's pursuit of self-sufficiency and rigid control over information has resulted in a closed society with limited freedoms for its citizens. Critics argue that such outcomes highlight the danger of concentrating power in the hands of a single ruling party, leading to the erosion of basic human rights. Critics point out that these historical failures serve as cautionary tales, demonstrating that the path to a truly egalitarian society is fraught with complexities. The practical implementation of socialist principles can often deviate from their theoretical foundations, resulting in unintended authoritarianism, economic inefficiencies, and suppression of individual liberties. Proponents of Marxism and socialism contend that these historical examples should not be taken as a wholesale rejection of these ideologies. They argue that factors such as external pressures, internal dynamics, and specific leadership choices played significant roles in shaping these outcomes. Moreover, they emphasize that the failures of these regimes should lead to a re-evaluation of implementation strategies rather than a complete dismissal of the underlying principles. In conclusion, the failures of historical implementations of Marxism and socialism underscore the challenges of translating ideological aspirations into practical realities. The examples of the Soviet Union, Maoist China, and North Korea serve as cautionary tales, revealing how the concentration of power, lack of checks and balances, and rigid adherence to ideology can lead to unintended authoritarianism, human rights abuses, and economic hardships. The discourse surrounding these instances highlights the importance of critically examining the mechanisms of implementation while still engaging with the underlying ideals these ideologies propose. Number 5. Lack of price. Mechanism. Critics of socialism often raise concerns about the absence of a price mechanism, a fundamental feature of capitalist economies. In capitalist systems, market prices play a pivotal role in conveying information about supply and demand, guiding efficient resource allocation. Critics argue that socialist central planning, which neglects the price mechanism, can lead to mismatches between production and consumption, potentially resulting in shortages or surpluses of goods and services. Market prices act as a powerful signal in capitalist economies, reflecting the interplay of supply and demand. When demand for a particular product increases, prices rise, encouraging producers to increase supply and allocate resources accordingly. Conversely, when demand declines, prices fall, prompting producers to adjust their production levels. This mechanism ensures that resources are directed towards goods and services that are in demand, allowing for a responsive and efficient allocation process. In contrast, socialist systems often emphasize central planning, where the state or a centralized authority makes decisions regarding resource allocation. Critics argue that without the price mechanism, planners lack the real-time information necessary to make accurate judgments about the relative scarcity or abundance of goods. As a result, production decisions might not accurately align with actual consumer preferences, potentially leading to imbalances in supply and demand. One common criticism is that in the absence of market-determined prices, socialist economies may experience shortages of goods that are in high demand. Without the upward pressure on prices to signal scarcity, there is little incentive for producers to increase production. This could lead to frustration among consumers who are unable to access the products they desire, impacting overall satisfaction and well-being. Conversely, the lack of market-determined prices could also result in surpluses of goods that are overproduced. In capitalist systems, falling prices prompt producers to reduce supply, preventing excessive accumulation of unsold goods. In socialist systems, without price signals to guide production, overproduction might occur, wasting resources and reducing the efficiency of the economy. Proponents of socialism counter these criticisms by highlighting the potential benefits of central planning, such as the ability to prioritize essential needs and reduce inequalities in resource distribution. They argue that while market prices are indeed effective in resource allocation, they can also lead to income disparities and exploitation. Central planning, they assert, allows for a more equitable distribution of resources and can prioritize sectors like healthcare, education, and social welfare. To address these concerns, some socialist models incorporate hybrid approaches that attempt to combine central planning with certain market mechanisms. For instance, market socialism retains elements of private ownership and market-driven price signals while still maintaining collective ownership of key industries. In conclusion, the lack of a price mechanism in socialist systems is a genuine concern, as it can lead to mismatches between production and consumption, potentially resulting in shortages or surpluses. Critics argue that the price mechanism is a powerful tool for efficient resource allocation, and its absence in centralized planning can undermine economic efficiency. However, the debate highlights the complexity of balancing the advantages of price signals with the goals of equitable distribution and social welfare that underlie socialist ideologies. Number 6. Disincentive for innovation and creativity. A central concern frequently raised against socialist systems revolves around their potential impact on innovation and creativity. Critics argue that in a system where resources are collectively owned and distributed, the motivation for individuals to innovate and take risks might diminish. They assert that the prospect of personal rewards, a driving force behind human creativity and progress, could be suppressed under socialist policies, potentially hampering overall societal advancement. One of the key foundations of capitalist economies is the incentive provided by potential financial gain. Entrepreneurs and innovators are spurred to develop new ideas, products, and services by the promise of financial rewards and the possibility of gaining ownership or control over their creations. Critics contend that socialist systems, with their emphasis on collective ownership and resource distribution, might undermine this driving force, leading to a decline in innovative efforts. In a socialist framework, where resources are commonly owned, the connection between individual effort and personal gain can become blurred. Critics argue that this blurring might result in a lack of initiative to push the boundaries of creativity. Without the promise of reaping the full benefits of their innovative endeavors, individuals may opt for less ambitious or risky projects, ultimately affecting the pace of technological and scientific progress. Furthermore, critics suggest that the absence of competition, which often characterizes socialist systems, might lead to complacency. In capitalist economies, the need to outperform competitors fosters an environment where continuous improvement and innovation are paramount. In contrast, socialist systems may lack the same competitive pressures that drive constant innovation. Proponents of socialism counter these arguments by emphasizing the potential benefits of collective cooperation and shared ownership. They contend that innovation can still flourish under socialism, but it might be directed towards different goals, those that prioritize societal needs over individual accumulation. They also argue that by removing the fear of failure and the pressures of competition, socialist systems can foster a more collaborative and supportive environment for innovation. To address the concerns regarding innovation, some socialist models incorporate mechanisms to reward innovative efforts within a collective framework. For instance, models like market socialism allow for limited private ownership and competition within specific sectors, enabling individuals to reap personal rewards while still adhering to certain collective principles. In conclusion, the concern over disincentives for innovation and creativity in socialist systems reflects a legitimate consideration about the potential trade-offs associated with these ideologies. Critics argue that the prospect of personal rewards is a powerful driver of human progress and creativity, and its potential suppression under socialist policies might slow down advancements. However, the ongoing debate underscores the complexity of balancing individual incentives with collective goals. It also highlights the potential need for innovative approaches within socialist frameworks that encourage and reward creative efforts while still aiming for equitable resource distribution. Number 7. Inequality in a different form. An intriguing paradox emerges in the discourse surrounding socialism. While the ideology seeks to redress wealth inequality, critics contend that it has the potential to give rise to a distinct form of inequality. This form of inequality arises from the concentration of power in the hands of a powerful state bureaucracy, which can wield considerable control over resource allocation, potentially leading to the emergence of a new elite class with unequal privileges. At the core of this criticism lies the concern that centralized planning and state control, integral to many socialist systems, can inadvertently concentrate power in the hands of a few decision-makers. While these systems seek to dismantle traditional capitalist hierarchies, critics argue that they risk replacing them with a different kind of hierarchy, one defined by the authority and privileges of state bureaucrats. Socialism's goal of addressing wealth inequality often necessitates a high level of state intervention. This can manifest as direct state ownership of key industries and resources, or as extensive regulatory control over economic activities. Critics contend that this level of control can create a bureaucracy with significant authority over resource allocation, effectively deciding who gets access to what resources. In this scenario, those in positions of authority within the bureaucracy could wield disproportionate influence and enjoy privileges not accessible to the wider population. Furthermore, the concentration of power in the hands of the state might lead to a lack of transparency and accountability. Critics fear that an unchecked bureaucracy could make decisions that benefit a select few while disregarding the needs and aspirations of the broader population. This could lead to a new form of inequality where individuals connected to the state apparatus enjoy privileges not available to others. History offers examples of socialist systems where the concentration of power resulted in an elite class. The Soviet Union, for instance, saw the rise of a powerful political elite that held considerable control over resources and decision-making. This elite class often enjoyed better living standards and access to goods and services that were not available to the average citizen. Proponents of socialism acknowledge these concerns, but argue that the potential for a new elite class is not inherent to the ideology itself. They emphasize the importance of designing mechanisms to prevent the concentration of power and ensure accountability. Participatory models of socialism, for example, advocate for more decentralized decision-making processes that involve a broader range of citizens in resource allocation. In conclusion, the critique of inequality in a different form highlights a complex challenge within socialist systems. While socialism aims to address wealth inequality, it must contend with the risk of centralizing power and creating a new elite class with unequal privileges. Striking a balance between state intervention for equitable resource distribution and preventing the concentration of power is a central consideration in the ongoing debate about the practical implementation of socialist ideals. Recognizing the potential trade-offs is crucial for designing systems that avoid replicating the very hierarchies socialism seeks to dismantle. Number 8. Incompatibility with cultural diversity. One of the key criticisms directed at Marxist and socialist ideologies pertains to their perceived incompatibility with cultural diversity. Critics argue that these ideologies tend to prioritize economic considerations over the nuances of cultural, religious, and social differences. In multi-ethnic or multi-religious societies, attempts to homogenize economic structures might lead to conflicts and undermine social cohesion. Marxist and socialist ideologies are primarily concerned with addressing economic inequalities and creating a more equitable distribution of resources. While these goals are often noble, critics contend that these ideologies may overlook the diverse range of identities and values that exist within a society. In their pursuit of economic equality, socialist systems could potentially downplay the importance of respecting and accommodating cultural, religious, and social differences. One of the key concerns is the potential for a one-size-fits-all approach. Critics argue that socialist systems might inadvertently push for uniform economic structures and policies that don't take into account the specific needs and aspirations of different cultural or religious communities. This lack of flexibility could create tensions between the economic goals of socialism and the preservation of cultural diversity. In multi-ethnic or multi-religious societies, the attempt to implement socialist economic policies without due consideration for cultural context could lead to conflicts. For example, if a particular cultural group relies heavily on traditional forms of economic activity that differ from the socialist model, their way of life and livelihoods might be threatened. This could result in resistance and resentment towards socialist policies, potentially undermining social stability. Furthermore, critics argue that the disregard for cultural diversity within socialist frameworks could lead to a form of cultural homogenization. By emphasizing economic equality above all else, there is a risk of sidelining the importance of preserving cultural traditions, languages, and identities. This could erode the unique fabric of diverse societies and lead to a sense of loss among different communities. Proponents of socialism acknowledge these concerns, but often argue that their focus on economic equality is intended to create a foundation of social justice upon which cultural diversity can thrive. They assert that a more equitable distribution of resources can lead to improved living standards for all individuals, which in turn can provide a basis for preserving cultural practices and identities. However, critics contend that this perspective overlooks the complexity of cultural interactions and the potential conflicts that could arise when economic policies clash with deeply ingrained cultural practices. Striking a balance between economic goals and cultural preservation is a challenge that requires thoughtful consideration and adaptation. In conclusion, the criticism of incompatibility with cultural diversity underscores a significant challenge within socialist ideologies. While the pursuit of economic equality is a central goal, it must be balanced with an appreciation for the diverse cultural, religious, and social identities that shape societies. The debate highlights the need to develop socialist models that accommodate cultural pluralism, recognizing that economic justice and cultural diversity are intertwined and must be approached holistically for a harmonious and cohesive society. Number 9. Centralized power and authoritarianism. A substantial objection raised against socialist and communist systems revolves around the potential concentration of power. Critics argue that these ideologies, while advocating for equitable resource distribution and collective ownership, can inadvertently lead to authoritarianism as the state gains extensive control over citizens' lives in the name of the greater good. One of the core concerns stems from the very nature of socialism's emphasis on central planning and state intervention. While these features are intended to ensure fair distribution and address economic disparities, critics contend that they can create a power vacuum that the state might be tempted to fill. As the state assumes control over key industries and resources, there is a risk that this power could extend beyond economic matters into areas such as social policies and individual freedoms. The concentration of power within a state bureaucracy can lead to a situation where dissent is suppressed in the name of preserving the collective well-being. Critics argue that as the state becomes the arbiter of what constitutes the greater good, it might curtail individual rights, freedom of speech, and political participation. This can result in a society where citizens are compelled to conform to the state's vision, stifling diversity of thought and expression. Historical examples like the Soviet Union and Maoist China serve as cautionary tales of how centralization of power can lead to authoritarian rule. These regimes, which started with socialist ideals, ultimately saw the emergence of powerful political elites who held unchecked control over the lives of citizens. Critics assert that the drive to achieve the ideals of socialism was used to justify a concentration of power, resulting in suppression of dissent and widespread human rights abuses. Proponents of socialism counter these criticisms by highlighting that the concentration of power is not inherent to socialist principles themselves, but rather a potential outcome of how they are implemented. They argue that the misuse of power seen in historical cases was a result of specific leadership decisions and external pressures rather than an intrinsic feature of socialist ideology. To address the concerns about centralized power and authoritarianism, proponents advocate for mechanisms that ensure transparency, accountability, and checks and balances. Participatory models of socialism, for example, emphasize the involvement of citizens in decision-making processes to prevent an unchecked concentration of power. In conclusion, the objection of centralized power and authoritarianism highlights a genuine concern within socialist systems. While the goal is to ensure equitable resource distribution and collective ownership, there is a risk that such systems could inadvertently lead to the concentration of power in the hands of the state. The debate underscores the need for vigilant safeguards, transparency, and mechanisms that prevent the misuse of power. Balancing the goals of socialism with the preservation of individual freedoms and political participation is a complex challenge that requires careful consideration and adaptability in practice. Number 10. Complexity of implementation. One of the central challenges posed to the implementation of socialist or Marxist systems is the inherent complexity of orchestrating large-scale societal changes. Critics argue that the intricacies involved in managing resources, determining needs, and ensuring equitable distribution can lead to bureaucratic inefficiencies and even corruption. Socialist ideologies envision a fundamental shift in the way resources are owned, allocated, and distributed. These systems often involve central planning, where the state assumes a significant role in making decisions regarding production, consumption, and resource allocation. While the goal of creating a more equitable society is noble, critics contend that the practical execution of these principles can be fraught with challenges. The complexity of implementation arises from several factors. First, central planning necessitates a deep understanding of the economy, including intricate details about supply chains, production capacities, and consumer demands. Critics argue that such comprehensive knowledge is difficult to obtain and maintain, potentially leading to inefficient resource allocation. The absence of market-driven price signals, which help guide resource distribution in capitalist systems, can exacerbate this challenge. Moreover, determining the diverse needs of a population can be a formidable task. People have varying preferences and priorities, and ensuring that goods and services are distributed fairly to meet these diverse needs is a complex endeavor. Critics fear that centralized systems may struggle to accurately assess and respond to these nuances, leading to mismatches between supply and demand. Additionally, critics raise concerns about the potential for bureaucratic inefficiencies. As centralized systems grow in scale, the administrative machinery required to manage them also expands. This can lead to slow decision-making, bottlenecks in resource allocation, and a lack of responsiveness to changing circumstances. Critics argue that this inefficiency might hinder economic growth and reduce the overall welfare of the population. Corruption is another concern linked to the complexity of socialist implementation. The concentration of power inherent in these systems can provide opportunities for individuals to exploit their positions for personal gain. Critics worry that the lack of market mechanisms and private ownership can create an environment where corrupt practices are difficult to detect and deter. Proponents of socialism acknowledge these challenges, but often argue that they can be addressed through careful planning, transparency, and accountability mechanisms. They contend that the potential benefits of creating a more equitable society outweigh the challenges, and that lessons from past implementations can inform more effective approaches in the future. In response to concerns about inefficiency, some socialist models incorporate elements of decentralized decision-making. Market socialism, for instance, allows for limited market mechanisms alongside collective ownership, aiming to strike a balance between efficient resource allocation and equitable distribution. In conclusion, the complexity of implementing socialist systems is a legitimate concern that encompasses resource management, equitable distribution, and the potential for bureaucratic inefficiencies and corruption. Critics argue that the intricate planning required can lead to practical challenges that undermine the goals of these ideologies. Proponents, however, believe that with careful consideration and adaptive strategies, these challenges can be navigated, and the potential societal benefits can be realized while minimizing the negative outcomes. Conclusion. The objections raised against Marxism and socialism encompass a wide range of concerns, touching on economic, political, and societal dimensions. While proponents of these ideologies emphasize their potential to address wealth disparities and promote collective well-being, critics remain cautious about the practical implications and potential pitfalls. It's important to engage in thoughtful and informed discussions that consider both the merits and challenges of these ideologies, acknowledging the complexities inherent in their implementation on a broader scale.